All right, guys. So 31 days ago, the United States sent a letter to Israel demanding that within 30 days, they must substantially increase the amount of aid that they are allowing into Gaza, where basically the entire population is facing either near famine or famine-like conditions at the moment. And the threat was, if you don't allow more aid in, we're going to start thinking about withholding weapons or withholding some of the aid and the funding that we are giving to Israel in the midst of this year-plus long genocide. Now, surprise, surprise here. Similar to every other red line that we have seen from the Biden administration that Israel immediately crosses, there are no consequences for them violating this. So here from Al Jazeera, despite 30-day Gaza aid ultimatum, U.S. says that support for Israel will proceed. They also point out here, importantly, in the byline, that U.S. law prohibits military assistance to allies blocking humanitarian aid. But Washington says no assessment on Israel. And we'll get to some clips here in a second on what exactly the U.S. government is saying to defend themselves here. Now, it has been the case for basically the entirety of this genocide that Israel has been illegally blocking aid from getting into Gaza, and thereby the U.S. is violating our own laws by continuing to send them military equipment. That is illegal under U.S. law, to send military assistance to countries that are blocking our humanitarian aid. Israel has been doing that. The United States has been continuing for months now to pretend as if they're not doing that. They end up sending this letter that essentially came out a few weeks before the election, sort of as a political ploy to say to the American people who care about Israel and Gaza that, look, we are taking this seriously, we're going to do something about this, just wait until right after the election, and then we'll finally hold Israel accountable. So it was a political ploy that I think anybody could have seen from a mile away that they were not going to follow through on, and that is exactly what's happened here. Now, we also have this headline here from The Guardian saying that aid to Gaza, not only has it not increased since the U.S. sent this letter to Israel, but it has fallen to the lowest level in 11 months, despite this ultimatum. So not only has Israel not met the U.S. requirements for additional aid to go to Gaza, but they have further restricted aid from getting to Gaza. Again, disproportionately in the north, where they are essentially doing a complete and total siege and ethnic cleansing of the entire population there. So, again, to say that it's up in the air at this point, that Israel is violating international law and that the U.S. is violating not only international law, but also our own laws, I mean, I think it's as pretty clear cut as you could ask for. Now, we had 8 aid organizations, as pointed out here by Jeremy from Refugees International, 8 aid organizations who published a scorecard on Israel's compliance with these recent U.S. demands on humanitarian assistance. This is what they came up with. They say, across the board, the Israeli government has failed to comply with U.S. and international law on relief in Gaza. It is past time to halt arms transfers. So they say here, the letter that the U.S. sent to Israel set a 30-day deadline for them to comply. That expired today or yesterday. Our joint report assesses Israel's compliance across every metric that we could measure, and unsurprisingly, given the pattern of willful obstruction over the past year, Netanyahu's government fully complied with none. Not a single one of these metrics that these aid organizations were tracking. I mean, we could go through this one by one. You know, this was one of the major U.S. demands here, was enabling a minimum of 350 trucks per day to enter into Gaza to allow for assistance to flow consistently through all 4 major crossings. The estimates that I've seen right now from the United Nations is that it is less than 40 trucks per day that are getting into Gaza. The demand 30 days ago from the U.S. government was 350. So that's, I don't know, what, 12, 15% of what the U.S. was demanding? I mean, we could continue allowing people in Al-Mawasi, the humanitarian zone, to move inland before winter. By the way, just today I saw a strike, as posted by Dropsite News, inside of Al-Mawasi. Another one of these strikes targeting these supposed humanitarian zones. I mean, enhancing security for fixed humanitarian sites and movements, rescinding evacuation orders when there is no operational need. We could go on and on throughout every single one of these metrics that they were tracking, and Israel did not fully comply with a single one of these. Not one of them. So What is the U.S. response to that? Well, here we have Secretary of State Antony Blinken, as pointed out here by Barack Ravid, who has decided that there will be no change to the military assistance to Israel following the deadline that the U.S. gave on humanitarian situation in Gaza that expired yesterday. They say the officials have said that Israel has taken important steps to address U.S. concerns regarding humanitarian situation in Gaza and stressed that the U.S. wants to see more steps in the coming days. Now, we get to some of the back and forth here between the press pool and Biden administration officials. Here we have Karine Jean-Pierre, who is being asked about the report that I just showed you guys from these 8 aid organizations here. And let's just go ahead and listen to a little bit of how she explained the Biden administration.
Today, there are multiple international aid agencies that say that Israel has failed to address the concerns and that the situation is even more dire than a month ago. Does the administration think that Israel has taken enough steps, or do you agree with these aid organizations and their assessment?
So a couple of things. Let me just take a look back at the last 30 days. Israel has taken steps to address the measures laid out in that letter from the two Secretaries Blinken and also Austin. And we are in a discussion with the Israelis about both the important steps Israel has taken as a result of the United States intervention, as well as additional steps that need to be taken. So those conversations continue, those discussions continue, and we, the United States, is indeed the largest provider of humanitarian assistance to the Palestinian people. And so we are going to continue to do everything that we can to surge humanitarian assistance in Gaza. We understand how important it is, and in your question, we understand how dire that is.
Okay, so a whole bunch of nothing there, right? Saying that Israel has taken steps to address the measures laid out in that letter. No, they haven't. They have not. So, I mean, even again, by the demands that were made by the U.S. government to Israel, they have not met those metrics. They are not taking steps in the right direction. Again, you look at the data, it's gotten worse since that letter was sent. So it's just sort of like bloviating bullshit here coming from Karine Jean-Pierre on what the actual situation is on the ground, right? And this is the same kind of rhetoric that we have been hearing for months at this point. Oh, well, we're consulting with our Israeli counterparts and we're going to continue to try to urge them to do X, Y, Z and to take these steps. And we see encouraging signs on the horizon, and it never comes to fruition, right? Everything continues to get worse over time. And again, the fundamental reality underlying all of that is that if the U.S. is not willing to enforce our own red lines, if we are not willing to impose consequences on Israel in order to fall in line with the demands that we're making, in this case, allowing more humanitarian aid into Gaza, then Israel is never going to abide by that, right? Because from the jump, this has been a collective punishment campaign of the entire population of Gaza. From the moment that they declared, like Yoav Gallant did towards the beginning of this, that we are going to cut off the food, the fuel, the water, the electricity, the medicine, etc. There are no innocent civilians in Gaza. We knew exactly what the strategy was from the beginning. So for the Biden administration, still at this point, over a year into this, to pretend as if Israel gives a single solitary shit about increasing the amount of aid to the Palestinian people, no, it's the exact opposite of that. They want to restrict aid from getting to the Palestinian population there. That's part of their strategy. They said it from the beginning. So it shouldn't be a mystery at this point exactly what's going on. Now we have another clip here that I have loaded up from another White House correspondent journalist. Let's go ahead and listen to this.
Humanitarian aid in Gaza that you discussed earlier, that was a U.S. deadline. That was a month ago. Yeah. You said that Israel has taken some steps, but among those steps are the U.S. had asked for 350 humanitarian aid trucks a day. We're nowhere near that point. Is the U.S. essentially giving Israel a pass when it comes to humanitarian aid?
No, absolutely not. I mean, that's why the conversations continue. The discussions continue.
The discussions, the conversations continue. They will continue forever. Indefinitely, and there will never be any progress made on those conversations or discussions or whatever the fuck you want to call them. Okay, again, the exact same rhetoric that we have been hearing month after month after month for the last year of this genocide. Nothing ever changes. Nothing ever changes, right? The question here was pretty simple, right? The question was, you gave this deadline. You gave the demands for the amount of humanitarian aid that you want to see entering into Gaza. And the response is basically, well, we're just going to have continued conversations with them. Well, then what the fuck was the point of the letter in the first place? Why did you even send this letter to Israel? Other than as, again, a political ploy right before the election to try to give the indication to voters who are skeptical of Biden and Kamala and their handling of Israel and Gaza to say, look, we're thinking about holding them accountable right after the election. So go vote for us. I mean, I literally see no other purpose to this kind of a letter other than that. There's no point in sending the letter if you don't plan on enforcing the consequences that you laid out in said letter, right? Now we continue because we have further questions here. This time we're switching from Karine Jean-Pierre here to State Department spokesperson Patel. Now let's go ahead and watch the first, minute and a half of this back and forth where he's asked about these aid organizations saying that the situation has gotten worse over the last month.
But I mean, if it's the totality of the humanitarian situation, we have 8 aid groups that came out today and said that the situation has not only not gotten better, it's gotten worse over the past 30 days. So how do you square that with this assessment that or non-assessment that they are in violation?
Jenny, I can't speak to the kinds of assessment that these groups made. Certainly have seen that reporting. But to Matt, I just laid out some of the metrics that we saw. We saw the reopening of Erez. We saw a new crossing opening.
Measure. You're saying, okay, they did this, but we were told, you guys said it would be based on the results on the ground that have not borne out here. So Can you talk us through the deliberation here?
I'm not going to get into the deliberative process, Jenny, but specifically when...
So we're not going to get into the deliberative process that we use to determine whether or not Israel has followed in accordance with the demands that we made of them. I mean, think about that. The question is very simple here, guys. The question is, you sent this letter to Israel. These were the demands. Aid organizations on the ground say that they are not following in accordance with those demands. You say that everything's fine and dandy, right? What are the metrics that you're using to make that determination, right? That Israel has not violated international law, that they're not violating U.S. law, that they are not, making it more difficult to get aid into Gaza. How are you going about making that assessment? And his response is to say, I'm not going to get into that. Sorry. And I'm also not going to get into the report from 8 different aid organizations about how the situation has worsened, right? Not even stalemated. It's certainly not gotten better, but worsened since you sent that letter to Israel. It's almost like Israel is completely ignoring everything that you guys say because they know that you have no leverage that you are willing to wield over them to put them into check. That's the reality here. Now, another one here, before we move on, we got 2 more clips here, I think. Hear from us all, Rod. The gaslighting from this administration is unreal. You can see the frustration of the reporters. So here we have the infamous Matt Lee doing what he does best.
Achieved.
Before you move to Lebanon, can I just ask you, why did you bother to put in 350 trucks a day if it doesn't matter?
I'm not going to speak to the...
I mean, you keep saying you're not going to speak to specific metrics, but you guys are the ones that made this specific. We didn't. We didn't give the Israelis 30 days to do all this stuff. You guys did. And now those 30 days are up. And as you heard from everyone so far, and these aid groups that came out last night, they haven't met them. And all of a sudden you say that the metrics that you put out don't matter.
I never said that they don't matter. What I said was...
said rabbit hole. I mean, these are metrics exactly like you put out. It's not a rabbit hole.
Meaning I don't want to take up time getting into a specific tit for tat on truck numbers.
Well, then why did you put them in the letter?
You can't take
those
time.
metrics,
really
the metrics and the number of... Let me just be very clear. The metrics and the number of trucks getting into Gaza every day absolutely matter. It is, I said that to him because I did not want to get into a specific technical conversation on inflows and outflows. I don't have more updated numbers for you beyond the ones what I said to Tom. Matt, the metrics absolutely matter. The point that we are making, the 2 broad points that we made, is that 1, on specific truck numbers, we think these operational changes that we've made can help get us to that goal.
Okay, so, I mean, again, to reemphasize what Matt Lee was saying here, so what's the point of putting these kinds of demands in a letter if you're not going to hold them to that standard? Right? Why did you write this letter? Why did you make these demands? Why did you say we want X, Y, and Z to happen or else there will be consequences if you never intended to impose any sort of consequences? Again, the only explanation that I can return to is that this was just a pure, sort of psychopathic political calculation from the Biden administration to try to, I guess, marginally help them in the election. Turns out that didn't really help out that much. But you can tell that he's struggling up here, guys. I don't know how guys like Patel or, some of the other guys, Matthew Miller or Ned Sullivan or Antony Blinken or Biden for that matter, I don't know how these guys sleep at night. I genuinely don't. Your entire existence is getting up in front of journalists who, many of these people who actually show up to these State Department briefings are doing incredible jobs, right? These are not the same kind of like MSNBC or Fox News punditry sort of class kind of people. These are real journalists who are trying to do their jobs and to hold you to account. And your entire existence is to get up there and to just straight up lie to them. And not only are you lying to them, not only are you coming up with every excuse, every justification in the book that you can think of in that moment, but you're lying and coming up with these excuses for a fucking genocide, right? This is not lying about, oh, well, we thought trickle-down economics was going to work, so that's why we gave, tax cuts to Jeff Bezos or whatever. You're playing with thousands of people's lives in this matter. You're playing with the potential for the entire region to explode into an all-out confrontational war that could directly involve the United States as well. So this is not a game. This is not fun, but his entire job is just to get up there and try to bullshit and gaslight these journalists and the American people. How do you sleep at night? Now, one final thing here. I'm not going to play this clip, but I'll read off what sort of the back and forth was going to the same points. Here we had Tom Bateman going point by point through the letter on what Israel failed to do in Patel's nonsense replies. So Tom says, the letter says, enable a minimum of 350 trucks per day, and you've got 30 days to do it. The UN says there's an average of 37 that have entered per day. That's 1/10 of what you asked for. Patel says, we're going to raise this with our partners in Israel. Tom replies saying, I'm asking about what you demanded in the letter. Then we had end the isolation of the North. Jabalia presumably remains under siege. Patel says, I'm not going to get into a tit for tat on every item in the letter. It was a suggestion of steps. Tom responds. He says it didn't say that it was suggestions, right? There was supposed to be leverage that was deployed in this situation. These were supposed to be more demands than suggestions. But in the U.S.-Israel relationship, there really are only suggestions, if we're being real. And Patel says, we've seen them take significant actions. Tom finally responds, as far as I can see from what you've said today, absolutely nothing that you've asked for is actually happening. And he's entirely correct. And then the question again is, are you willing to use any leverage to force the things that you are demanding to actually happen? Or are you just going to continue to play this game back and forth with Israel where you pretend like you're being hard asses behind the scenes and making demands and carving out red lines that you have no intention of following through on? And I think we know what the answer to that is. Now, I mean, keep in mind, we're now after the election. So at the same time that I'm saying that I think it was largely political that they sent this letter in the first place, there's also this ideological angle here where the United States, I mean, Joe Biden just lost the election, right? Or the Democratic Party lost the election under Kamala Harris's campaign. You have nothing to lose, right? You're heading out. Trump is about to take control of the presidency in January. So Biden has nothing to lose. His team surrounding him have nothing to lose. And yet they are still choosing to engage in this kind of policy, which tells you that it wasn't just political. It's also ideological. They fully agree with what Israel is doing in Gaza. They fully agree with it. Because this is no longer a political calculation. This is now just, what are you going to do between now and when Trump takes office? Do you plan on doing anything to check Israel? And the answer to that, I think, is a clear and definitive no. Now, I'll leave you off with this because we also had some responses here from, politicians in the U.S. We had Senator Van Hollen, who's actually usually better when it comes to Israel and Gaza, so I'm not going to give him a hard time here, but he says that he was concerned that the 30-day deadline that the U.S. gave to Israel to improve Gaza conditions was, quote, a political attempt to convince voters the Biden-Harris administration cared about Gaza. Yeah. I mean, again, not going to give Van Hollen too much of a hard time because he's relatively better on this issue, but no shit. No shit. If only there were people who were saying this at the time when this letter came out, that this was a clear political play from the Biden-Harris administration. That was obvious from the start. It's obvious now. And the situation in Gaza, in the meantime, continues to get worse and worse over time. I want you guys to go and check out two different things. Number one, Drop Site News reporting on the latest in terms of what has been happening in Gaza over the last couple of weeks. But then also over on Breaking Points today, we recorded an interview with Abu Bakr from Dropsite News, and he was coming to us live from Gaza, giving an update at how dire and horrifying the situation is on the ground right now. So that interview, as the time that I post this video on my channel, will probably be out. Highly recommend you go follow Breaking Points and check out that video as well, because that was one of the most impactful and powerful interviews that I've ever gotten to witness in person. There was a portion during the interview where the lights in his apartment that he was recording from went out in the middle of the interview. So I highly recommend you guys go and watch that. And yeah, it's going to be tough moving forward, because the Trump administration, based on their appointments so far, and I'll probably have a follow-up video on this later today, but he is appointing the most hardcore ideological Zionists in the entire country to basically every single key administration position, whether it's the Secretary of State with now Pete Hegseth being appointed to that position, whether it's Marco Rubio as Secretary of State and Pete as Secretary of Defense, or whether it's Mike Huckabee being appointed as the ambassador to Israel, a man in Mike Huckabee who literally believes in the sort of Christian evangelical end times cult beliefs that there needs to be a Jewish state in control of Israel in order to bring the end times where Jesus comes back and, there's a rapture and the end of the world, etc. So some pretty horrifying picks. Elise Stefanik, another one. Obviously Mike Waltz, who we covered in the video yesterday. The Trump administration appointments so far have been aggressive, hardcore Zionists. So moving forward, it's hard to say that things are going to get better. And as we heard from Bezalel Smotrich as well a few days ago, the finance minister in Israel, they're planning not only to continue with this genocide in Gaza, to continue with the offensive in Lebanon, to continue to escalate with Iran, but also to make 2025, in his own words, the year that they engage in, trying to acquire sovereignty fully over the West Bank, or what they refer to as Judea and Samaria. So alarming stuff on the horizon. I'm going to stay on top of it. We're not going to back off. We're not going to forget about this as an issue. We're going to keep making it as uncomfortable as possible for the people who are in power to continue to engage in these atrocities.
Politic guy has the best politic. Believe me, no one does it like him. Believe me. Everyone is saying